Hello everyone, long time no see. Welcome back to my channel. This is the third video in my self-study tutorial of classical Chinese grammar, and I hope you're all having a great time wherever you are. A year has passed since I started this personal project, and even though my speed of production has been super slow, I think I have learned a lot in the process. And I hope my sharing has been useful to some of you out there as well. It has been really hot here these days in the Northern Hemisphere where I am. I don't know how the weather is in your place, but if it's also hot, I hope you're watching my video in a relatively cool location and staying hydrated. In this lesson, I will be learning several ways to form complex verbal predicates in classical Chinese. They can be formed by verbal conjunctions, auxiliary verbs, and quasi-auxiliaries, as well as co-verbs. The rest of the lesson is in the accompanying PDF, the link to which can be found in the description area under this video. This lesson corresponds to Chapter 5 in Pulleblank's textbook. And as usual, I have also added stuff from Galebenz's textbook. Let's start by learning how to form complex predicates via conjunctions. Sinated languages tend to use different conjunctions for different categories, and classical Chinese is no exception. In this chapter, we meet a conjunction for verbs, especially for the subclass of verbs labeled adjectives. This conjunction is pronounced sa, but in general, overt conjunctions are only optional in classical Chinese. Let's take a look at the example in 1a. Prong gu du, prong sa zlings, kang nu lao, prong ma du, pux sa clus kang nu lao. Or in modern Chinese, bang you dao, pin qie jian yan qi ye, bang wu dao, fu qie gui yan qi ye. And the English translation of the sentence is, when a country has the way to be poor and lowly in it, it's shameful. So here we have the first coordinate phrase, poor and lowly, brum sa zlins. And the second half of the sentence says, when a country does not have the way to be rich and noble in it, it's shameful. Be rich and be noble, another coordinate phrase, bux sa clus. So the basic usage of the conjunction is very simple. We just put it between two adjectives. So adjective 1, sa, adjective 2. This is how it is used. Now let's move on to the example in 1b, which shows us that the conjunction sa is optional. So the sentence reads, pram brag tia pu bu lux gua du grax glu. Or in modern Chinese, ban bek jie but fu dai yu dao lu yi. The English translation of the sentence is, those whose hair is streaked with white, so that means the elderly, will not carry loads on their heads or on their backs, on the ways and the roads. So there are actually two coordinate phrases here, and the one we want to focus on is the one in boldface, bu dux, which means back carry and or head carry. And since this coordinate phrase with a covert conjunction is embedded in a negative context, the covert conjunction is translated as or. So that's the basic usage of the adjectival coordinator, sa. In the same chapter of Pulleyblank's textbook, we also meet another conjunction for verbs, this one, nye. This conjunction is different from the one we have seen above, in that nye is mainly used in verb or event serialization. The conjuncts linked by nye may be either bare verbs, verb phrases, or full clauses. So let's take a look at an example with this new conjunction. The sentence in 2a. Dun mun ton gual liebs slu, sang tu skra, closed slungs new kings mrangs slu. Or in modern Chinese, Teng wen gong wei shi zi, jiang zhi chu, guo song jian meng zi. The English translation of the sentence is, when Duke Wen of Deng was crown prince, he passed through Song on his way to Chu and saw Mencius. So let's take a look at the structure of the sentence. Dun mun klum, this is the subject. Gual, this is a copulate. Liebs slu, this is a nominal predicate. And that is the first part of the sentence. Now let's turn to its second part. Sang du sra. So this is a future tense marker, will. And this is a verb, go. This is the destination. So he was going to 楚 Sngra. Okay. And what happened on his way? He closed Slungs. Okay. He passed Song, which is the name of another state. And in the state of Song, Duke Wen of Teng met Mencius. So the verbal conjunction new links 3 different events. Event 1, going to the state of Chu. Event 2, passing by the state of Song. And event 3, meeting Mencius. Now let's take a look at the sentence in 2b. Niet klued new sags, niet new slug. So, oops, sorry, here's a serious typo. I had forgotten to add a space between xiao and yao here in this line of gloss, and everything from this point on is badly aligned. I will correct this in the PDF file later. For now, let's simply focus on the classical Chinese line, which is correct. Its English translation is, the sun rises and I work, the sun sets and I rest. I freely enjoy myself between heaven and earth, and my mind is self-satisfied. And again, let's divide the sentence into chunks, starting with this bit. Ni clues new sucks. Here the subject is omitted. I work. Okay. The next part of the sentence, nyug nyub new slug, has exactly the same structure. So the sun goes down and I rest. Finally, seo leo gua, being free and unfettered in between heaven and earth, that is in the world. And nye, slum cooks please took. My mind is self-satisfied. It is worth noting that when the conjunction nye indicates some more abstract semantic or narrative order, the first conjunct can sometimes be an auxiliary verb. So let's take a look at the example in 3. Gu nu new rong please pam, or in the modern Chinese, qi neng luan si fang. Here's the English translation. How could I be capable of governing the kingdom? Or literally, how could I be capable and govern the kingdom? Let's move on to the sentence in 3b. As for a scholar of grand virtue, Deng stug tu zru here. Kun pu tu nu ging. A ruler does not get to or does not succeed and treat him as a subject. Here the auxiliary verb is tug. This is the auxiliary. And ging is the main verb. So tug nu ging literally means get and treat at subject, or get to treat at subject. And the second half of the sentence has exactly the same structure. Ba means father, so that's the subject. Tug nu slu literally means succeed and treat as a son. A very quick review. In section 1 of this lesson, we have learned 2 verbal conjunctions in classical Chinese. Sa for adjective coordination, and nye for verb serialization. And now let's move on to the second section about auxiliary verbs. Generally speaking, the internal structure of complex predicates could be either coordination or subordination. Above, we have learned coordination, which is also the simpler case between the two. Subordination, on the other hand, is more complicated because both the subordinating and the subordinate component may vary in their grammatical status. There are 2 major types of subordinate complex predicates in view of the subordinating component. The auxiliary verbs and the coverbs. Here we begin by looking at the first type, auxiliary verbs. Pulleyblank and Galebentz collectively teach the following auxiliaries. Log, once, mean wish, want to, or would like to. Ne or could mean can, may, or be capable of. Dang means should. Kun means be willing to. Klam means dare or venture to. Liu means begin to or start to. And finally, dug means get to or manage to. And since the concept auxiliary is not hard to understand, our main task here is just to learn these vocabulary items one by one. So let's see some examples. Beginning with the 2 auxiliary verbs for wish or want to. Let's first look at the example in 4a. Log beg tao deals, or in the modern Chinese, yuk pig tu di. So log is the auxiliary verb want. Beg is the main verb, open up territory. and Tagdeals is a compound noun that means territory. So as a whole, the sentence means you want to enlarge your territory. The sentence in floor B, 王藏瓜gu diu, or in modern Chinese, 愿藏于其室. So here, 王 is the auxiliary, meaning wish. Zang is the main verb, meaning storing up or accumulating. Gua is a preposition or co-verb, meaning on, in, or at. And gu diu is a possessive noun phrase, his market. So the whole sentence means traders wish to do business on his market. And just like English want and wish, the two desire denoting auxiliaries in classical Chinese, log and guans, can be used as ordinary lexical verbs as well. As in 5, guang log tu, the king wishes it. So here the complement of log is a third-person singular pronoun, it. So that's how the two auxiliary verbs in classical Chinese for wish or want, log and wants, are used. So somebody, log, do something, or somebody wants, do something. Both mean somebody wants or wishes to do something. Next, we learn the two auxiliary verbs for can, may, or be capable of. One of them is nu, and the other is could. Let's learn these through examples. Beginning with the example in 6a. Nyat nu long mrens. You capable use destiny. Or more naturally, you are capable of following God's will. So here, the subject is nyat, and here is the auxiliary verb nu. The main verb is long, to use, and the object of the verb is mrens, destiny. So the structure is you are capable of using the destiny. Next, the sentence in 6b. Lun klong kug nyans. So here we actually have a coordinate structure involving 3 predicates, but no overt conjunction. The first predicate is lun, honest. So this is predicate 1, honest. And here's predicate 2, klong, or respectful. And here kug nyans, or can give way to others, is the third predicate. If someone can give way to others, then that means they're modest. So apparently, the person this sentence is used to describe is honest, respectful, and modest. And we should note that nu can be used as an ordinary lexical verb as well, just like log, wish. Let's take a look at the example in 7. 不言女nu jiu la, or in modern Chinese, 不言而能知语. The English translation is, could he have done it if he had not been a man of superior talent? Or literally, is it true that he is not talented but is capable of it? Okay, so the relevant part is here, nu jiu. Nu means can or capable, and jiu is again the third person singular pronoun. The basic structure of the sentence is this. 不言 is the first predicate, and nu jiu, capable of it, is the second predicate. And the two predicates are linked by the conjunction nu, which conveys the semantic relation but here. And finally, we have the yes-no question marker, la, which converts the meaning of the entire sentence into a question. So very quickly, the two auxiliary verbs in classical Chinese for can or capable of are nu and could. They're used in exactly the same way as their English counterpart can. So, somebody can do something is translated into classical Chinese as somebody knew or could do something. So, for instance, if you want to say, I can speak classical Chinese, it would be, I knew or could speak classical Chinese. The third auxiliary verb we learn is 当 should, and again let's directly learn it through examples, beginning with the sentence in 8a. Gas ngang ru tu dang suns ga kuz, or in modern Chinese, 故言理之当先胡替. Okay? The English translation of the sentence is, therefore, we say that principles should come before matter. As for the structure of the sentence, gas means therefore, ngang means say, its subject, we, is omitted. And its complement is the sentence, principle should come before matter. And as a general rule, object clauses in classical Chinese are nominalized by the genitive marker 就, which is inserted between the subject and the predicate of the sentence. Now let's move on to the sentence in A, B. Oops, here's another typo, sorry. So let's just look at the first line. This, not. Ninging is a compound noun that means feudal official. Dang is the auxiliary verb should, and grals is the main verb discuss. And here skra is a relative pronoun standing for the object of the main verb discuss, that which a feudal official should discuss. And finally, dao is the assertive final particle supporting a nominal predicate, which we have learned in lesson 1. So the overall meaning of the sentence is, this is not that which a feudal official should discuss. Also note that unlike the other auxiliary verbs we have seen so far, this item is often used in a generic, impersonal way, as in the sentence in 9. If one often speaks ill of others, how should he deal with ensuing trouble? Again, we have the verb ngan, to say, which takes a clausal object. So here's the object clause, which is again nominalized by the genitive marker 2. Say that people are not good. Dang is the auxiliary verb should. Here's the main verb make, be like, or make resemble. The direct object is go grons, later trouble. So the causative construction here literally means make later trouble be like what? The next auxiliary verb we learn is kun, which means be willing to. Let's look at the sentence in 10. The wind blows for a whole day with clouds of dust. He is kindly willing to come to see me. Tung plum sa mru, guis nien kung mrug. Tung plum means long-lasting wind. Sa is the conjunction end. Mru means cloud of dust. Guis nien together form an adverb, kindly, and kung is the auxiliary. Be willing to. Mrug, to come. Kindly willing to come. Let's move on to the sentence in 10b. The young lord, that is Lord Xingling, wanted to meet the two people, but the two people hid themselves and were not willing to meet the young lord. Kronslu means the young lord. Lok is the auxiliary verb for want that we have learned. Kens rangin means meet two people, but rangin, the two people, hid themselves. Pu kung, not willing to. Here is the second auxiliary verb, kung, be willing to. Kens kronslu. Okay. We don't know why those two people did not want to meet the young lord, but at least we know how to use the auxiliary kung now. The next auxiliary verb we learn is klam, which means dare or venture to. Let's look at the example in 11. Pra kag klam dang ngal slu. He, how dare, withstand me. How dare he face me? Okay, so here is the auxiliary klam, the verb withstand. Ngal means me. So that is the auxiliary use of the word klam. But in addition to that usage, the word has also developed a different function in classical Chinese as an honorific marker, more or less meaning venture to do something or do something with awe. And this is used most often with a first-person subject, as in 12. Full of awe, I respond to and praise the emperor's magnificent order. From this function was derived the idiomatic phrase, klam muns, I venture to ask, or may I ask. For instance, may I ask what you're doing? Klam muns, what you're doing. Or, may I ask what your name is? Klam muns, what your name is. So let's quickly recall the three auxiliary verbs we have learned just now. Dang, should, kung, willing to, and klam, dare. So, for instance, I dang do something means I should do something. I kung do something means I am willing to do something. And I klam do something means I dare do something. Now let's move on to the next auxiliary verb, hlu, which means begin to or start to. This is another multi-categorial and polysemous word in classical Chinese, and here we're only concerned with its auxiliary use as an inceptive aspect marker. For instance, in the sentence in 13, Tu gu gui hlu sags runs. or in modern Chinese, 蚩尤为始作乱. 蚩尤 is a personal name, 为 is the preclassical copula, clue is the auxiliary verb, and saxrons is the main verb phrase to rebel or to do rebellion. So the whole sentence means 蚩尤 was just beginning to rebel. And finally, the last auxiliary verb of the section is tug, which means get to or manage to. The sentence in 14a, plieg, plieg, gua, sche, put, tug, clued, glue. Or in the modern Chinese, 必此于此 fu tek chut yi. Plieg is not an auxiliary verb, but an adverbial. That means must. So this is an adverbial. Clue is the verb. That means die. Guasque means in here. So the first half of the sentence means I am doomed to die here, or I will inevitably die here. The second half of the sentence, put, tug, clued, glue. Put means not. Tug is the auxiliary verb we're learning. Get to or manage to. Include is another main verb. And finally, glue here is the perfect aspect marker. And the entire second half of the sentence means I already can't get to escape. As for a good person, I would not get to meet one. Thus, as long as I get to meet someone with lasting integrity, that is already okay. The sentence is pretty long and can be divided into two parts from here. The first part is a topic comment structure, with the topic being 见人 or good person. So here's the topic. And here is the comment. I will not get to meet one. So as for a good person, I will not get to meet one. And the second part of the sentence is a conditional one. So here is the auxiliary verb, tug, and this is the main verb, kins, to meet. And this part, gun, is another verb phrase to have persistence, but this verb phrase is nominalized by tia. So gu gon tia means someone who has persistence, and that gives us the condition, if I get to meet someone who has persistence. If so, then that is okay. Sekal. So above we have learned the real auxiliary verbs in classical Chinese, and next I'm going to learn what I call quasi-auxiliaries, which are also VP selecting items that can help us form complex predicates, but are usually not considered auxiliary verbs in textbooks. These mainly include some causative-like verbs and some vocabulary items that are known as tough adjectives. Let's begin with the causative-like verbs. There are two main causative-like verbs in classical Chinese, sru and rings. Sru literally means to employ or to send, and rings literally means to order. But as causative-like verbs, they both mean to make or let. So the construction sru or rings plus a nominal phrase plus a verb phrase means make somebody do something. So in 15a, we have a sentence, 跌sru min lang sklen meng. This caused people to nourish the living and mourn the dead, not having regrets. Or more naturally, this is to let the people nourish the living and mourn the dead without regrets. 15b, guaz gu mun for its gate. Diang ra gok, build a tiled room. To build a tiled room for the gate, so that the water would not come in. Marings, so as not to let. Oops, here's another typo. So let's just ignore the last bit of the sentence and only pay attention to the causative-like verb. I will make sure to correct all these typos before uploading the PDF to my website. Next, let's turn to the tough predicates. Generally speaking, in a so-called tough construction consisting of an NP, a tough predicate, and a verb, the NP is the logical object of the verb. So as a result, the reading of the entire construction is somewhat passivized. And this construction is known as the tough construction in theoretical linguistics because the English adjective tough is a typical example, as in 16. The problem was tough to solve. So here the NP is the problem, the tough predicate is simply tough, and solve is the verb. The NP, the problem, is the logical object of the verb to solve. Some further tough predicates in English are easy, difficult, good, bad, impossible, etc. In classical Chinese, the tough predicates cannot be easily distinguished from normal auxiliaries just by the syntax because there's no overt reflection of the semantic distinction. And so we can only distinguish the two categories by the semantics. In classical Chinese, the typical tough predicates are also adjectival, just as in English, and Pulleyblank lists the following 4 typical examples, including kao, possible or permissible, sog, sufficient or worth, none, difficult, and legs, easy. Let's directly look at the examples. First, let's look at the example in 17a. Klindra, heaven underneath, or the world. Kal, possible. So the world is the subject. Kal is the tough predicate. And Gunsgua Tiang, resolve in palm, is the VP. Since this is a tough construction, the NP occupying the subject position on the surface, heaven underneath, should be the logical object of the verb. Hence the English translation, the world may be revolved in the palm of your hand. And then the sentence in 17b, Sug mun guang. Sug is a temporal adverb, then, and is not part of the tough construction. The NP munguan is the surface subject, and putsog is the negated form of the tough predicate, sog. So this is the tough predicate. And finally, kab is the verb. So the entire sentence means King Wen is not worthy of being taken as a model. The sentence in 17c is again conditional. The condition is conveyed in the one-word predicate clue. Something lasts for a long time. If something lasts for a long time, then it becomes difficult to change. None is the tough predicate, and change prongs is the verb. The NP that should be the surface subject of the tough construction is omitted here. So here there should be an NP. Something is difficult to change. Finally, let's look at the sentence in 17d. Having studied for 3 years, but still not becoming a government official. Okay, so that's a super long background setting sentence. Let's ignore it and only pay attention to the tough construction part. This is not easy to achieve. In the original classical Chinese sentence, it corresponds to this last bit. Put legs to lao. Put legs is the negated form of the tough predicate legs easy. Not easy as a whole is the tough predicate. Took here is used as an ordinary lexical verb meaning to get or to achieve, and the surface subject NP is again omitted, which should be here if we were to insert it back in. So something is not easy to get or to achieve. Okay. Among the 4 tough predicates in 17, kao possible, sog sufficient, nan difficult, and legs easy. Kao is the closest to a real auxiliary verb in meaning, and it is often freely translated as can or may. But as a tough predicate, it can only be used passively, in the sense of something can or may be done in a certain way. Whereas in active contexts, we should use the related compound auxiliary, kao lu, or ko yi in modern Chinese, which means can or able to, but is used in an active way. So let's take a look at the sentence in 18a. Nga ngu jia is the subject NP. Kao lu is the compound auxiliary, can or able to. Kursbrag is the main VP. It is obvious that the surface subject NP, the 50-year-olds, is also the logical subject of the verb. Similarly, in the sentence in 18b, the subject NP, ning ngu ma gun, is both the syntactical and the logical subject of the verb. Similarly, while the tough predicate sog can only be used with a passive complement, the compound auxiliary sog lu can be used with an active one, as in 19. My strength is sufficient to lift this much weight, but is not sufficient to lift one feather. The compound auxiliary sog lu is here. Its subject is nga rug, my strength, and the verb is kla, to lift. As we can see, the subject NP, my strength, is the subject of the verb lift, both syntactically and logically. So above, we have learned 4 typical tough adjectives in classical Chinese. They are kao, possible, sog, sufficient, none, difficult, and legs, easy. Now let's move on to learn the coverbs. The last type of complex predicate forming elements I'm learning in this lesson are the coverbs. These more or less correspond to prepositions in languages like English. And in classical Chinese, the preposition-like coverbs are all derived from verbs. In Table 1, I have listed the major coverbs in classical Chinese, that is, coverbs that are taught in the 2 textbooks that I am following. So here's 11 coverbs altogether. Let's go through them one by one. First, le. The literal meaning of this coverb is take or use, and its covert meaning is with or by means of. So if you want to say, I write with a pen, in the classical Chinese, it would be something like, I write le a pen. Of course, the word order would be different, but this is how the coverb is used. It is simply used in front of a nominal phrase. So this is the coverb, this is the NP it governs, and the entire coverb phrase functions like a prepositional phrase in English. The second coverb is la, which literally means accompany or be with, and as a coverb means with or and. So, for instance, I go to school with my friend would be something like, I go to school la my friend. That's how we use la. The third coverb is guals, which as a verb means be on the side of or support, and as a coverb means for, on behalf of, or for the sake of. It is used in sentences like, John baked a cake for Mary. That would be, John baked a cake, guals, Mary. Here, guals means for. The next 3 coverbs in the list are hlies, lo, and zlong. All have the same meaning as coverbs. They all mean from. And as lexical verbs, they all mean go along or follow. So if someone time travels from today to the Qin dynasty and people ask them where they're from, they might say, I come from the 21st century. That would be I come, please, or lo, or zlong, the 21st century. So that's from. And then the next 2 coverbs, gua and ga. Gua was more dative in origin, and ga more locative. But that distinction had long been lost in history, and in most of the classical Chinese texts, the authors simply stick to ga for every dative/locative meaning. For instance, let's go back to the sentence. I go to school, la my friend. I go to school with my friend. Now we know how to say to. We can put that in. I go gua school, la my friend. I go gua school, la my friend. Okay, or I go ga school, la my friend. The next coverb in the list is nya, which literally means comply or resemble, and as a coverb means like. For instance, if we want to say John looks like his father, we can say John looks nya his father. Oh, by the way, actually, I know how to say father in classical Chinese. It's ba. It's something like ba. I actually also know how to say his. His is gu. So we have 3 classical Chinese words here in the sentence. John looks nya gu ba means John looks like his father. The last 2 coverbs in the list, tigs and grub. These 2 items both mean to or till as coverbs. Their literal meanings are also similar. They mean arrive or reach. So for instance, if you want to say, John slept from yesterday till today, we can say John slept, hlies, yesterday, tigs, today. The basic syntax of coverbs is very straightforward because they basically just introduce prepositional objects of various kinds, and they're usually preverbal, but not always so. So as long as we have learned the prepositional meanings of these coverbs, we should be fine. We're likely to encounter coverbs in classical Chinese in one of the 2 patterns in 20. So the first construction is in 20A, which consists of a coverb plus a nominal phrase, and the coverb phrase as a whole precedes the verb phrase. This construction more or less means doing as an adverbial, do something. So here the present participle is like an adverbial modifier. Okay, so you're doing something while doing something, or while something else is happening. The second coverb construction is that in 20B, which consists of a main verb phrase before the coverb phrase. And this construction more closely resembles the prepositional phrase in English. To illustrate, let's look at the examples in 21. 21A. Sing, look, cold, lug, slow, boom. Or in modern Chinese, 醒一锅煮子饭. Here we see a pre-verbal coverb phrase, use halberd or with halberd. So after Duke Wen of Jin woke up, he took a halberd and chased 子饭. And then the next sentence in 21b, Sred Nin Le Ling has a post-verbal coverb phrase. The coverb is still le, and the complement of the coverb is ding, which means a club or a stick. The two different word orders aren't that different intuitively, but according to Pulleyblank, the literal meanings of the two coverb phrases above are respectively, he, using a halberd, chased 子饭, with the focus being on the chasing event, and someone in killing a person uses a club with the focus on the tool being used. So that seems to mean that whatever comes last in the complex verbal predicate would bear the narrative focus. That is the pre-verbal and the post-verbal coverb phrase. Von der Galebentz also mentions a third word order. So we have a nominal phrase as usual, but the coverb that governs the nominal phrase is placed after the nominal phrase. As an example, let's take a look at the sentence in 23b. Tong Ling's le, by self-devotion and sincerity. The main verbal event is tuk do, get it. So someone gets something by self-devotion and sincerity. And the second half of the sentence has exactly the same structure. We have another coordinate phrase, then we have the coverb, and then we have the main verbal phrase, fleek do, lose it. So putting these components together, we get the overall meaning of the second half of the sentence. By pride and extravagance, someone loses something. So on the surface, the coverb in 23a here looks somewhat like a post position. But there's another possibility, and that other possibility is that this is a derived word order via the topicalization or focalization of the NP. This kind of flexible P stranding in the pre-verbal position can probably be taken as further evidence that classical Chinese coverbs are still fundamentally verbal and not really prepositions of the English type. By contrast, we can hardly strand post-verbal coverbs in classical Chinese, as in 24. We can't say something like club, kill, person, with. So we can say club, with, kill a person. That's okay. But we cannot say club, kill a person, with. Since learning coverbs is essentially vocabulary learning, as I pointed out above, I will not go through the list in Table 1 in more detail. Next up, I will just illustrate the usage of one coverb in detail. That is the coverb le. We have already met this coverb above, and here, let's first take a look at its basic verbal sense, to take or to use. Let's start with the sentence in 25a. Gra gogie le sklon, kun nin le Prague, tu nin le Rig. And the English translation is the ruler of Xia used spruces for certain altars. The Yin people used cypresses, and the Zhou people used chestnut trees. And similarly, if we want to say, I used Pulleyblank's textbook, we can say, I le Pulleyblank's textbook. Next, let's look at the sentence in 25b. Nga liu ri glu pral sug liu ju. At this point, we should already be quite familiar with the third person pronoun tu. Here it is used as the object of the verb le, and the English translation of the sentence is, I declined the ritual. They, by contrast, took it, or they used the ritual. Next, let's turn to the coverb use of le. As a coverb, le is mainly used to introduce an instrumental object, okay? But sometimes it may also be used to introduce a normal accusative or direct object. Let's look at the two examples in 26, starting with 26a. So, le tings de kug. By uprightness, somebody rules the state. Or more naturally, one may rule a state by uprightness. The next part of the sentence has exactly the same structure. Le Graal, by crafty dexterity. Somebody uses weapon. And finally, we have yet another by something do something construction. By not having anything, somebody can take hold of the world. So all the three occurrences of le in 26a are used to introduce an instrumental object. On the other hand, in the sentence in 26b, klun slu le nin zlon slun, le ri zlon slun, or in modern Chinese, yun zi yi jin cun sim, yi li cun sim. We have two occurrences of le, both of which introduce an accusative object. So le, benevolence, keep heart, means to keep benevolence in one's heart, and le, good manners keep heart, means to keep good manners in one's heart. A very important rule to remember is that when the object of the coverb le is the third person pronoun tu, that pronoun must be omitted, as in 27. Okay? When they talk, they all speak of ancient times and thereby condemn the present, and they polish false words or lies and thereby confuse the facts. So here we have two occurrences of le, both of which are translated as thereby, but more verbosely we can translate them as by it. So if we want to say something like, I learn classical Chinese in order to read ancient texts, we can say, I learn classical Chinese, le, read ancient texts. Okay. Oh, we actually know how to say ancient now. It's ga, so we can put that in. I learn classical Chinese, le, read ga texts. This use of the coverb le is described as concise in the Galebentz textbook. And similarly, Pulleyblank calls this the anaphoric use of coverbs. Apart from that, there's another common usage of the anaphoric le, which is to mark the point of departure for spatial or temporal phrases. So for instance, in the phrase, le mrug, le marks a point of departure, and the verb mrug means to come. So literally this phrase means therewith come, or come in from that point on, which more naturally can be translated as afterwards or since. Apart from these basic uses, le still has a number of other derived uses, which I have listed in 28. The basic verb meaning of le is to take or to use, but as a verb, it could also mean to take something as or to deem something in one's mind, or to affect or concern something. As a coverb, on the other hand, it could also introduce a cause or reason and be translated as because of, or it could introduce the role that a person assumes and be translated as. In addition, it could be used as a commutative or coordinative marker, meaning and or with. And it can also be used as a temporal adverbial marker, introducing a normal temporal adverb. Let's look at some examples illustrating these derived uses of le. First, the sentence in 29a. With Yu Dingguo being the commandant of justice, that is the court officer, the people deemed themselves not wronged. So here we have a deem phrase that is rendered by le in classical Chinese. So, please le, self-deem or deem oneself, not wronged, put gong. So if we want to say, I deem this textbook very good, we could say, I le this textbook very good. The sentence in 29b shows the verbal meaning affect or concern of le. If I alone have guilt, then it doesn't affect you all who reside in my kingdom. Next, let's look at the sentence in 30a. Sngrat yin le die gu slu dongs. Okay, Sngrat yin is the subject, means the Chu people or people living in the Chu state. Le die, because of this. Gu means to criticize or to reprobate. So the overall meaning of this sentence is that the Chu people criticized Zizhong because of this le die. Next, let's look at the sentence in 30b. Here, the coverb le is used to introduce a role as a king, le kun. Just to practice a little more, let's translate the sentence. As a teacher, John praised the student because of this. Le teacher, John le die, praised the student. Now let's move on to the sentence in 30c, which describes some inclement weather condition. So in Old Chinese, Kling das ru lings le plume, or in Modern Chinese, Tian da loi dian yi feng. There was a great thunderstorm along with wind. So here the meaning along with is rendered by the coverb le plume, along with wind. And finally, in the sentence in 30d, le kong ning slu krub. He built a city in the year of famine. Here, the coverb le is used to introduce a temporal adverb. Le kong yin means in a bad year or by a bad year, a year of famine. Something happens. They built city. This temporal adverb introducing use of le can be highly useful. For instance, we can use it to translate something as mundane as on July 19th, I did something. So, le July 19th, I did something. A point that is worth noting here is that in this temporal adverb introducing function, le is often used postpositionally. So, for instance, in the sentence in 31a, Lux le kicks sneak, night use continue day. We have a temporal object, lux, night, before the coverb le here. Likewise, in 31b, we have 4 temporal adverbs involving a postpositional le. A final point to mention about the coverb le is that it has a less frequent alternative, longs, which literally also means to use. We have 2 examples in 32. Let's begin with the sentence in 32a. Longs gra clings diang, paying respect to one's superior as a subordinate. So here, the second occurrence of longs in the sentence is used in exactly the same way. So longs diang literally means assuming the role of diang, of a superior, but is more naturally rendered as a superior, or in the role of a superior. By the same token, we want to say as a teacher. In addition to le teacher, we can also say longs teacher. The sentence in 32b, muk pa klongs dao, diet longs pu zub, or in modern Chinese, mo fu kong duo, si yong put qip. In English, we can translate this as, there are too many strategists, but precisely because of that, they're not accomplishing anything. So, muk pa klong dal literally means strategists are very many. Diet longs, because of this, put zub, not accomplish things. As I have said, I will not be going into any more detail about the remaining coverbs that I have listed in Table 1. However, I do want to say a bit more about the 2 coverbs of place, gua and ka. According to Pulleyblank, this coverb gua is etymologically related to the verb guan, to go, and from there was derived the use of gua as an inceptive or continuative aspect marker, which is prefixal. Now let's take a look at the examples in 33. 33a, booms guan gua pul. Booms and guan respectively mean male and female phoenix. So what are the phoenixes doing? They gua pul, they're going, flying. And what happens when they go flying about? Quas quas gu gua. Rustling their wings. Their wings are rustling. Okay? So when the phoenixes are flying about, their wings are rustling. Next, let's look at the sentence in 33b. Tu slu gua klu. Here, tu is not a third-person pronoun, but a demonstrative meaning this. This child go into her husband's home, which is an indirect way of saying this girl is getting married. So that is the auxiliary use of gua. And on the other hand, as a coverb, gua is always post-verbal and is mainly used after motion verbs to indicate destination or direction, especially in classic of poetry. Occasionally, it is also used to indicate location without motion, or motion in the temporal dimension, or it could also be used to introduce the recipient. So these are all derived meanings of the coverb gua based on its more fundamental motion toward sense. Let's look at the examples in 34, beginning with 34a. We have 2 occurrences of gua in this sentence. The first occurrence is a verb, go to search them, go to look for them. And the second occurrence of gua means motion toward the forest. Now let's move on to the next sentence in 34b. Kongs mring gua dig. Kongs means crane. Mren is a verb that means cry. So the crane is crying, gua dig, on the anthill. And in the second half of the sentence, we have exactly the same structure. Butnans gua lig. The wife is sighing in the room, gua lig. Next, let's look at the sentence in 34c. Put diang kot klub. So their city is not constant, or their cities often change. And then the second half of the sentence begins with gua krun, means till now. Nga prong literally means 5 countries or 5 state regions. But if we put the sentence back to its context, then the more natural translation of it would be, they did not ever stay in the same city for long. Up till now, their capital has been in 5 countries or 5 state regions. Now let's look at the sentence in D. And somebody is keeping the younger pigs to themselves. And on the other hand, they are offering the older pigs, gua klong, to the prince. Compared to gua, the history of the coverb ka is much shorter. In line with the static meaning of ka as a verb, its coverb use is also static, and this is its major difference from the other coverb gua in texts that do distinguish the two. And accordingly, the coverb ka is always used with verbs that imply rest rather than motion. We should bear in mind that no matter what the grammatical distinction between the two coverbs gua and ka might have been, that distinction got blurred after the era of classical poetry. Finally, neither of the two coverbs gua and ka allows the third person pronoun tu after it. So when the logical object of the two coverbs is tu, is it, we have two pronominalized forms, guan for gua and gan for ka. Guan ge guan klia, guan smans ge mra. There we stayed, there we dwelt, and there we lost our horses. Now let's turn to the sentence in 39b, which is also the last example of this lesson. Kids, a place name. Gram Krub Lao, a dangerous city. So this place is a dangerous place. Why do we know that? Well, because somebody named Prag Hlug, or Guokshug in modern Chinese, this person, Hlikan, died in that place or died there. So here, kan can also be translated as there. This is the end of lesson 3, and here's a quick summary of the main grammatical points I have learned in this lesson. So in classical Chinese, we can form a complex verbal predicate by conjunctions. Specifically, I have learned 2 conjunctions for verbs, sa for coordination, especially for that of adjectives, and nu for verb serialization. I've also learned a number of auxiliary verbs, including lok or guans, wish want, nu or could, or can or able to, dang for should, kung for willing to, klam for dare, klu for begin to, and tug for get to or manage to. The 2 types of quasi-auxiliaries for complex verbal predicate formation are causative-like verbs and tough adjectives. Finally, I have learned numerous coverbs or prepositions. These are le, by or which, la, and or with, guas, for, please, lo, or zlong, from, gua or ka, to, at, from, etc., nya, like, tigs or grub, to or till. So that's all for today. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.